I never thought I'd end up back in Detroit. Not like this anyway. Not standing in the shadow of the old Packard plant, its skeletal remains clawing at a bruised evening sky. The air tasted of rust and rain, that particular Midwest damp that gets into your bones and stays there. That I was here for a freelance photography gig. Some artsy magazine wanted Urban Decay with Soul, or whatever. They paid well, enough to make the trip from Chicago worth it. I wasn't alone. Maya came with me. Maya, with her laugh that could cut through any kind of bad mood and her way of making the most mundane road trip feel like an adventure. She was a friend, mostly that there'd been a night, a few drinks, some blurred lines a year back, but we'd settled into something easier since then. Something that didn't require definitions. She said she wanted to see the real America, and I didn't have the heart to tell her that a rotting auto factory in Detroit was maybe a little too real. We checked into a cheap motel off I-94, the kind with vibrating beds and a smell of bleach trying its best to cover up decades of cigarette smoke. The plan was to scout the location at dusk, get a feel for the light, then come back after midnight for the real shoot. The magazine wanted that witching hour atmosphere. "You sure this is safe, Liam?" Maya asked, her voice a little tight as I parked my beat-up Jeep on a cracked expanse of asphalt that had once been our employee lot. The factory loomed ahead of us, a cathedral of failure. "Safe as houses?" I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Besides, it's just a recce that I in and out." She unbuckled her seatbelt and stretched, a movement that made my breath catch. She was wearing a faded Ramones t-shirt, knotted at her waist, and a pair of jeans so worn they were practically a second skin. The stretch pulled the fabric taut across her chest, and I had to force myself to look away, out at the graffiti-scarred walls. That my throat felt dry. It was stupid, this constant low-grade hum of want that buzzed under my skin whenever we were together, especially in moments of quiet or stress. That it felt like a failing, a weakness I couldn't quite shake. "Okay, cowboy," she said, hopping out of the Jeep. "Lead the way." We picked our way through the debris, shattered glass, twisted metal, chunks of concrete. The main entrance was a gaping mouth where giant rolling doors had once been, now just a dark opening into the belly of the beast. The silence was the first thing that got to me. That it wasn't a peaceful quiet. That it was a heavy, absorbing silence, the kind that feels like it's listening back. I lifted my camera, the click of the shutter absurdly loud, the flash bounced off broken windows, creating momentary ghosts in the deep blue twilight. "Spooky," Maya whispered, her voice barely carrying. She moved closer to me, her arm brushing against mine. That a jolt, warm and entirely inappropriate, went through me. That I could smell her shampoo, something with coconut, cutting through the scent of decay. My eyes dropped to her hand, resting on a rusted pipe. Her fingers were long, the nails painted a chipped black. That I had a sudden vivid image of those fingers tracing a line down my back, and I shook my head, clearing it. This was not the time that we ventured deeper. The vastness of the place was staggering. That it felt less like a building and more like a canyon system, with skeletal conveyor belts snaking overhead and deep pits where machinery had been ripped out. Our footsteps echoed, but the echoes seemed wrong, swallowed too quickly in some spots, bouncing back too many times in others. That's when we heard it. That a low rhythmic sound. That a hum, maybe dot or a grind. That we both froze. That Maya's hand found my forearm, her grip tight. "What is that?" she breathed. That I listened. That it was faint, but undeniable. That a mechanical sound. That a deep, metallic chug-chug-chug, like a heartbeat. "Old pipes," I suggested, my own voice sounding thin. "Wine through a broken vent?" "It sounds like it's coming from over there," she said, pointing towards a darker archway leading to another section of the plant. The rational part of my brain was screaming to leave, to go back to the motel, to drink cheap beer and watch bad TV and forget this whole thing. But the photographer in me, the part that was always chasing the perfect, weird shot, won out. "Let's just take a quick look." We moved toward the archway, the sound growing slightly louder with each step. That it was definitely mechanical. Regular. Purposeful. The space beyond the arch was even larger, a final assembly bay. And there, in the center of the cavernous room, under a massive skylight that let in the last of the evening's gloomy light, was a single functioning assembly line. That it was just one section, maybe 50 feet long. That it looked ancient, a grime-covered track with robotic arms suspended above it. And it was moving. The conveyor belt trundled along with that low, grinding sound, and the arms would occasionally dip down with a pneumatic hiss, performing some unseen task on nothing. There was no product on the line that IT was running empty. What the hell? I muttered, raising my camera that I took a few shots. The flash illuminated the grinding gears, the slick oil-stained tracks. That IT was the most surreal thing I'd ever seen. Who would leave this on? Maya asked, her voice hushed with awe and fear. She hadn't let go of my arm, that I could feel the warmth of her body through my jacket. My eyes drifted down to her jeans, to the way they hugged the curve of her hip, and for an insane second, all I could think about was the feel of that denim under my palm. The fear and the desire got all mixed up, a nauseating cocktail in my gut. Maybe it's on a timer, I said, not believing it. Some kind of maintenance cycle? It sounded pathetic even to me. That's when we saw him. A man was standing at the far end of the moving assembly line, partially shrouded in shadow. That he was just watching it. That he was tall and gaunt, wearing dark, heavy-looking work clothes. Coveralls, maybe, that seemed too thick for the mild evening. That he wasn't moving. Just standing there, observing the empty, grinding machinery. My first instinct was embarrassment, like we'd walked in on someone in a private moment. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing through the vast space. The man didn't turn. That he didn't acknowledge us at all. The grinding of the conveyor belt seemed to get louder. "Maybe he's security?" Maya whispered, her lips close to my ear. Her breath was warm. That I could feel the shape of her breast pressed against my arm. I should have been focused on the stranger, on the sheer wrongness of the situation. But my body was betraying me, responding to her proximity with a primal thrum of arousal. That IT was confusing, maddening. "I don't think so," I said, my voice rough. That I took a step forward. "Hey, we're just taking some pictures. Sorry to bother you." Finally the man moved, his head turned, slowly, mechanically, like one of the robotic arms above him. The light from the skylight didn't quite reach his face. That IT was just a pool of shadow under the brim of a worn-out cap. That he didn't speak. That he just looked at us. That I felt that gaze like a physical weight, a cold pressure in the center of my chest. That IT wasn't hostile. That IT was assessing. Empty. Then he raised one arm, a slow, deliberate movement. That he wasn't pointing at us. That he was pointing past us, back the way we had come. The message was clear. "Leave." "Okay," I said, my bravado completely gone. "Okay, we're going." "Sorry." I grabbed Maya's hand, her skin was soft, her fingers lacing through mine, and we backed away, not turning our backs on the man until we were through the archway. Then we half walked, half ran through the labyrinth of the plant, the grinding sound fading behind us, but the feeling of that cold, empty gaze lingering on the back of my neck. We burst out into the cool evening air, gasping like we'd been underwater. "What the fuck was that?" Maya panted, leaning over, her hands on her knees. The movement stretched her t-shirt, and I had a perfect, unwanted view down the front of it, of the smooth skin of her back and the black lace of her bra. That I looked away, my face burning. "I have no idea," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. "A squatter? Some kind of mechanic fanatic?" He didn't look like a squatter. His clothes were too clean, old but clean. She was right. That in the fleeting glance I'd gotten, the coveralls had looked faded and worn, but not dirty, not like everything else in that place. That we drove back to the motel in a tense silence. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a gaunt figure in coveralls standing in the middle of the road behind us. The streetlights of Detroit flickered past, doing little to dispel the deep unease that had settled in the car. Back in the motel room, the mood shifted. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but the close quarters and the adrenaline did something else. The room was small, just 2 double beds with a garish floral spread, a buzzing CRT TV on a dresser, and the ever-present smell of bleach. Maya kicked off her sneakers and sat on the edge of her bed, rubbing her feet. Her soles were dusty from the factory floor. That I watched the movement of her hands, the delicate bones of her ankles. That I wanted to go over there. That I wanted to kneel in front of her and take her foot in my hand, to feel the arch of it, to massage away the dirt and the fear. The thought was so vivid, so specific, it shocked me. "I need a shower," she said, breaking the silence. She stood up and pulled the knotted t-shirt over her head in one smooth motion. She stood there in her jeans and that black lace bra, and for a second I forgot how to breathe. the curve of her waist, the smooth plane of her stomach, the way the bra pushed her breasts up, it was all I could see. The fear from the factory was still there, but it was tangled up with this raw, hungry want that it felt dangerous. Wrong? She didn't look at me as she gathered her things and disappeared into the bathroom. The lock clicked shut, and a moment later, I heard the shower turn on. I fell back onto my own bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling. My mind was a mess. The image of the man at the assembly line, the sound of the grinding machinery, the feel of Maya's hand in mine. The look of her standing in the motel room. I felt like I was losing my grip. The shower ran for a long time. When she came out, she was wrapped in a too small motel towel, her skin flushed and steaming, damp tendrils of hair were plastered to her neck. She didn't look at me, just rummaged in her bag for pajamas and went back into the bathroom to change. We ordered a pizza from a place that claimed to be world famous, and definitely wasn't. We ate it on the beds, watching a rerun of some reality show, not talking about what happened. The ordinary routine of it was soothing, a blanket over the jagged edges of the evening, but I couldn't relax. Every time the ice machine in the hallway clunked on, I jumped. Every set of headlights that swept across the window had my heart in my throat. We're still going back, right? Maya asked eventually, picking the pepperoni off her slice. The client wants the midnight shots, I said, though the idea made my skin crawl. Yeah, she said. She didn't sound scared, she sounded resolved, a little excited even. It's the story of the trip, right? We can't not go back. I looked at her. She was sitting cross-legged on the bed, wearing just an old Yale sweatshirt and a pair of shorts. Her legs were bare, her knees pressed together. I could see the faint muscle definition in her calves. I wanted to trace it with my finger. I wanted to forget the factory, forget the strange man, and just lose myself in the simple animal comfort of her body. The conflict was exhausting. We'll be quick, I said. In and out. 15 minutes. We won't even go near that assembly bay. She nodded, a flicker of disappointment in her eyes. I think part of her wanted to see it again. We killed time until 11:30. The tension in the room was palpable. A third presence between us. It was part fear, part this unspoken thing that had always been there with us. I found myself watching the way she bit her lip when she was looking at her phone, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear. Each small movement felt amplified, charged. Finally, it was time. We drove back to the Packard plant in silence. The city was quieter now, the streets emptier. This time, parking the Jeep felt like a monumental act. The factory was a black hole against the night sky, sucking in the faint light from the city. We got our gear out. Tripod, my better camera, a powerful flashlight. The beam cut a shaky path through the darkness as we entered the ruin once more. It was different at night. The silence was even deeper, more profound. Our flashlight beam felt feeble, a tiny island of light in an ocean of black. We moved slowly, carefully, the memories of our earlier route fuzzy and distorted by darkness. I set up the tripod near a massive, rusted press, aiming for a shot of the starry sky through the collapsed roof. The camera's timer clicked away, taking long exposure shots. The only sounds were our breathing and the distant, ever-present hum of the city. That's when we heard it again. The grinding. It was fainter than before, muffled by distance and walls, but it was there, that same rhythmic chug-chug-chug. Maya's hand found mine in the dark, her fingers were cold. It's still on, she whispered. We stood there for a moment, listening. The sound seemed to be weaving through the ruins, coming from no particular direction and every direction at once. Let's just get the shots and go, I said, my voice low. We moved to another location, a long corridor, lined with empty lockers, their doors hanging open like screaming mouths. I set up the tripod again. As the camera was taking its 90-second exposure, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A flicker of movement at the far end of the corridor. I snapped my head around, shining the flashlight. The beam landed on nothing but crumbling walls and debris. What is it? Maya asked, her voice tense. Nothing. Probably a rat. I didn't believe it. We packed up and moved again, deeper into the plant. The grinding sound was a little louder here. We were getting closer to that central assembly bay, whether I meant to or not. It was like the place was pulling us in. I found a vantage point on a crumbling mezzanine overlook that gave a view of a vast, open floor below. I set up for another shot. As I was fiddling with the lens, Maya gasped. Liam. I looked up. She was pointing down at the factory floor, There were footprints in the thick dust that a single set, fresh. They weren't ours, they led from a shadowy doorway and disappeared behind a pile of rubble. My mouth went dry. Someone else was in here with us. The grinding sound chose that moment to shift. It didn't get louder, but it changed pitch. It became more purposeful. The rhythm intensified, and underneath it I could now hear a new sound, a faint high-pitched whine like a drill or a saw. "We should go," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The bravado was long gone, this was pure, cold dread. Maya nodded, her eyes wide. I started to break down the tripod, my hands shaking. That's when I heard it, a footstep. Not from below. From behind us. On the mezzanine. We both froze. I slowly turned, raising the flashlight. He was standing about 20 feet away, at the top of the stairs we just climbed. The man from the assembly line. He was just standing there, in the same dark coveralls and cap. His face still hidden in shadow. He was closer this time. I could see the rough texture of the fabric, the gleam of a metal button on the strap. He wasn't looking at the machinery below. He was looking directly at us, and he was holding something. A long metallic tool. It looked like a massive wrench, or a lever of some kind. He held it loosely at his side. None of us moved. The only sounds were the grinding from deep within the plant and the frantic hammering of my own heart. I could feel Maya trembling beside me. The beam of my flashlight began to shake. Then the man took a step forward. It wasn't an aggressive lunge. It was slow, deliberate, measured. Another step. My body unlocked. "Run," I choked out. I grabbed Maya's arm, yanking her toward the far end of the mezzanine, away from the stairs where he stood. There had to be another way down. We stumbled through the darkness, our flashlight beam bouncing wildly, illuminating glimpses of rusted catwalks and gaping holes in the floor. I chanced to look back. The man was walking, not running. Just walking after us, that same mechanical, unhurried pace. He was closing the distance effortlessly. The tool in his hand swung slightly with each step. We found a metal staircase, rust